and welcome. Now, the 10-day protest against hunger and bad governance in Nigeria may have ended, but it leaves many questions now over whether the protest actually achieved its purpose and whether a different approach may have been adopted and whether President Bola Tinubu's nationwide broadcast addressed any of the grievances laid out by the protesters. Now, against all odds, the organizers of the End Bad Governance protest made good their threat on August the 1st, 2024, when they trooped out with other Nigerians in a number of states to protest against hunger and hardship in the country. Nigerians, of course, were largely divided over the conduct of the protest, the duration, and the modality. Many had expressed fears of the possibility of the protest getting hijacked. Others, of course, dismissed those fears. The protest also highlighted the challenges facing the country as they vary significantly from one region to another. While the protest was largely peaceful in the southern part of the country, in the north, it was a different ballgame altogether, where there was massive looting and destruction of public infrastructure. And of course, we had those episodes. I mean, the situation now forcing some of the governors to impose curfews. And what's more, quite a number of persons in the north, that's the protesters now, demanded regime change while waving the Russian flag. About 40 people involved in the Russian flag episodes have now been arrested, and the Nigerian government says their action is a treasonable offense and a threat to the nation's sovereignty. Now, the Nigerian government has said it will address the demands of the protesters to avoid a repeat of such demonstrations going forward. Well, joining me now to discuss this further from Abuja is the lead director, Center for Social Justice, DEJI360. Also joining us via Zoom is the executive director, Center for Anti-Corruption and Open Leadership, CACOL, Debo Adenira. And also here in the studio with us is a public affairs analyst, Nelson Ekujimi. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on the program. Let me start with you, Mr. Anyekpere. You look at the protest that took place over the course of 10 days, the last week or so. Would you say, looking at what happened in the north, I mean, especially in many parts of the north, where we saw people chanting, calling for regime change, waving the Russian flag and all of that, and then the looting and destruction we had, and then you look at the way the protest was conducted in the south of the country, largely peaceful and all of that, would you say both sets of protesters came to the protest with different agenda?
Well, let me start by saying that what you saw in the north or what you saw in the south is a reflection of the level of understanding, education, and of course, political education in those very communities. Those people, most of them you saw on the streets of Lagos and southern cities, many of them were university graduates, educated, and could articulate the reason why they were on the streets. But from the pictures I saw, a good number of those I saw on the other side, on the northern side, looked like these street children, the margeries, maybe between the ages of 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, who hardly understood what the issues were. So they could possibly be amenable to being used or possibly on their own misunderstand what the issues are and then go off on a tangent that involve criminality, looting, burning down public and private places, and all those kind of things. So in essence, what happens is a reflection of the divide in terms of understanding what the issues are.
Let me come to you, Mr. Adenira. What's your take on that? I mean, do you feel the same way?
Well, yes, to a very large extent, but then the planning of the protest was a bit awkward because the demands, some of the demands were unmeetable. They are constitutional matters. Some of them are sociological. Some of them are political. And the consultations before the protest was not wide enough. So not many people understood why the protest should go on. What is the entry point? What is the exit point? and what exactly are the signposts of achieving the aim and objectives of the protest. And that is where the problem lies. But if given the general overview of what is going on in the country, I will say that the basic elements of the protest have been addressed by the administration even before August 1, the starting point. And of course, the basic thing should be in the area of hunger. When people talk about hunger and food were directed to be supplied to different states of the Federation, agricultural inputs were made available. Consultation with stakeholders in the area of food supply and other things are being addressed. Educational issues were being addressed. There are some constitutional matters like reducing the parliament to unicameral legislature couldn't have been achieved before, during, or immediately after the protest. There are a number of things like reversal of subsidy on fuel, petroleum products. It cannot be done immediately because it took time before the previous administration were able to remove the subsidy on fuel products. Reversal, giving grants to students, deserving students at various levels of education couldn't have been achieved within 10 days. There are so much consultation to be done,
but let me just...
to be done.
I'm still going to come back. We're still going to talk about those demands.
Very large extent, yes.
Yes, still going to talk about those demands. But Nelson, let me come to you. You look at the modality, the way the protest was organized. First of all, the protesters came out to say, look, there's no leadership, that no one is leading the protest. There are no leaders. So organization became an issue. Would you say probably... and you look at the demands. There were just so many demands out there, and there was no coordination, so to speak. So people were demanding different things, different groups making several demands. So no coordination. Would you blame that on the lack of leadership? That maybe the protesters should have probably organized themselves better. There should have been like a leadership structure that would coordinate and better organize this thing. And so that when it even comes to negotiation with the government, then that might be better organized.
Well, please, before I go on into that, I don't want you to deny me the opportunity of responding to your earliest question, and it is about the protests. If you look at the protests in the north as well as in the south, there's no difference between the two sets of protesters. Only the difference that exists is only in terms of age, because in the north we saw kindergartens or teenagers.
No, you clearly look at the demands.
I'm going to the demands. There's no difference, because you saw media interview some persons in the southwest who were part of the protest and they didn't know what they were saying. So the protesters either in the north or in the south are same and the same, except in terms of age. Then looking at the demands, don't forget that the security agencies alerted Nigerians that this protest is being organized with a sinister motive. And that is why you saw an avalanche of demands, ludicrous demands, that anybody who is rational will be asking, where did you get this type of demands?
And you don't think that is just because there was no leadership?
No, it wasn't because of no leadership. It was because the organizers. Don't forget, before the protest, the Department of State Services raised an alarm. The Nigerian police also did same. So when you are being accused of plotting mayhem and you allow your disciples to run haywire, it means you already have an agenda before coming out. So the lack of leadership, the lack of coordination, the lawlessness that they wanted to unleash on Nigerians, it's all part of the agenda of the organizers. So there's no doubt about it. And even you recognize that on the first day of the protest, because they try to latch onto the economic situation of Nigerians, trying to fool the people. Why you have the less people participating in the protests in the south here was because of the level of education we have here.
But that's exactly what Eze Onyekure
said. But the protesters here, if the governments here who were able to secure an interim order from the courts to confine them to a particular location had not done that, you saw what happened in Ojota, where some of them said they wanted to take to the streets. That look, we want to have a repeat of and even if you look at the comments from some of the groups before the protest, they were threatening repeat of NSAS, where police stations were attacked, arms and ammunition stolen, policemen killed, TV stations attacked, newspaper houses burnt, palaces of traditional rulers attacked.
The truth is we can't deny that the protest was largely peaceful in the south and that what we saw in the north completely different. But let me come to you, Mr. Onyekure. Do you think that there probably should have been better organization in terms of leadership now? That probably this protest would probably have been more effective if there was a clear-cut leadership of the whole process, you know, that you know could be identified.
Before I talk about the issue of leadership,
engage in talks with the government.
I think it is important for us to clarify what my colleague from Kakol talked about, the demands of the protesters, whether it has been met. The demands are not usually met on the pages of newspapers or through a television broadcast. We are discussing practical things. We had a situation where it was reported that 42,000 metric tons of grains have been released. And nobody could identify anybody who is poor or who is wretched who got a single cup of rice or a single cup of grain. You recall earlier that the federal government was talking about rejigging the National Social Register they inherited from the Buhari administration. They could not agree with the governors. So if anything was released, it was released to their party cronies and not to the common people on the streets. We usually have this penchant of taking delivery of failure from the jaws of success. If you are talking of success, you could model it on the Kenyan model in terms of the president had to sack ministers, had to withdraw a bill that parliament was about passing, and then moved ahead to take fundamental reforms because he got the message that the people were unhappy. In Nigeria, which bill has been passed, which minister has been sacked, rather, the government has fallen back on the default model of freezing the accounts of people.
That's the issue. Don't you think the reason...
Arresting people, just like some level of recrimination. And that is not the way to go. If we are serious to draw lessons, there has been nothing fundamental in terms of practical change in response to the demands. People are still hungry and people are still being persecuted. And that even gave the Speaker of the House of Representatives to effrontery to bring his subversion bill or whatever he called it until Nigerians shouted at him before he withdrew it. So absolutely nothing has been gained in terms of in the interest of the masses, except somebody wants to constitute himself into the Minister of Information and then come on television to say so.
Now, because you talked about the Kenyan situation, don't you think in the Kenyan situation the protesters were better organized, their demands were very clear and well articulated, and not the case of Nigeria where you had just, various kinds of demands flying, not knowing where they were coming from?
Well, if you understand what is happening in Nigeria, the hunger is so wide and wild that you cannot pinpoint any particular person. And the experience of even the last youth protests, the NSAS, when people were being persecuted, didn't make people amenable to presenting themselves as the leaders, even though they're still being fished out by the security authorities. Now, the question is, if they say they have attended to this or that it was lack of leadership, during the time the president was calling on traditional rulers and religious leaders, did he bother to speak to any youth group? Which youth group did he invite to the villa before even the protest started to discuss these issues? So there is this idea of Nigerians using politics in the negative sense and not in the positive sense. So I don't see any takeaway, except that the government has become more entrenched and felt that they've been able to ride the waves and nothing can happen to them, and the impunity writ large has been more entrenched in society rather than they are taking any positive lessons in terms of making the welfare and security of the people the primary purpose of government.
Nelson, how would you react to that? I mean, you look at what happened in Kenya. Of course, you could see a clear response from the government, but then there were clear demands too on the side of the protesters. I mean, that protest had leadership, and this leadership actually engaged. But in the case of Nigeria, this last protest we had, completely different.
Even before the protest in Kenya broke out, we saw the public anger against the tax law. And that was what crystallized into the protest. We didn't see Kenyans before the protest calling for regime change or waving Russian flag even during the protest. But in the case of Nigeria, like I said earlier on, and I still maintain, if persons believe that in the right to exercise your freedom to protest, then you should become lawless, then you should create mayhem, then you should commit treasonable felony. Well, I beg to disagree, because the only reason why you are able to exercise your rights is because there's law and order. If we were in the Obesian state of nature, you will not be able to exercise your rights where other superior or stronger beings or interests, prevail. So in this case, the protests, the End Bad Governance protest, was instigated and executed by people, who are subversive elements. And that was why you saw, your guest from Abuja was talking about the president. How many groups will go and meet with the president in Abuja when they have local government chairmen and they have state governors? As I sit before you, I belong to a group of youth organizations. We met with the Lagos state government. We never went to Abuja to go and meet Mr. President. We even had meetings at our local government levels, where our local government administrations called meetings of youth groups, market women, traditional rulers, clerics, you name it, every strata of the society. So if anybody assumes that in running a federal system of government, we should still be running the unitary centralist system where everybody will run to Abuja as if one man is the lord of the manor, I beg to disagree. So the protest in Kenya, you can see the difference. The protest in Kenya was organized. But the protests in Nigeria, like the DSS, and even we Nigerians, why a lot of us were against the protest was because we are products of protest. Comrade Debo is on this program, and we know how we organize protests. We don't go into hiding. We come out and we ensure that there's safety of life and property. Because when you're organizing a protest, it is not a tea party. It's a serious business. A lot of people come to execute different agenda under the protest. But because you have a clear-cut agenda, you ensure that any attempt to truncate the agenda that you want to drive out.
And that is where you have a clear-cut leadership.
That's where you have a clear-cut leadership, which was absolutely missing in this case.
Mr. Anyakwara, I have to ask you this. Do you, just as Nelson said, do you think that in this case...
On the beat to this.
That the protesters may have misdirected their anger, so to speak, that probably they should have taken their anger to their local government chairmen and their governors?
No, that is something that does not make sense to me, because the two critical issues, policies that resulted in the hunger and the anger in the land, were federal policies. The two policies were removal of fuel subsidy, announced by Mr. President at the point of swearing in. The second one was the flotation of the Naira, which Mr. President engineered the central bank to announce. And no local government chairman and no governor was in a position to reverse any of these critical policies. So it will be a waste of God's time if you go and start talking to a local government chairman or a governor who had nothing, who had no hand, who was not consulted even before those policies were enacted. If there was a need to meet a local government chairman, why was the president inviting religious and traditional rulers to the villa? You left the people who were laying a complaint, the youths, and you started inviting some of those who have contributed in no small measure to the political and economic rot of Nigeria. And all we hear my colleagues talking about is the disclosure by DSS and police. If the DSS and police war should be taken so seriously, why have they over 10 years not been able to stop the bandits that are causing mayhem all over Nigeria and stopping people from going to their farms? Why are they even saying things that nobody is interested in hearing? Look at even in Kano. We are hearing that the protesters went into a court And they did not take anything. They simply carted away the files that were being used to prosecute a national chairman of a political party. And you tell me that it is disguided elements. Where is that coming from? The people have always conducted themselves peacefully. It is the government that looks for trouble every time. For instance, why will you go to get an ex parte order to restrict everybody to Freedom Park in Lagos or the stadium in Abuja? Abuja is so big. 13, 14, 15 kilometers, no vehicle were moving. How do you expect somebody from Maraba to report to the National Stadium at the other end? And why did you go to sue persons unknown? How can you be getting a court order, such court order against persons? In a court process, there must be a plaintiff, there must be a defendant. I think the judges somehow are abusing these orders. And that instead of the courts being the bastion of democracy and human rights, the courts are now constituting themselves as clocks on the wheel of progress of Nigerians. To the extent that we don't interrogate these things, no court has a right to issue an order. What was even the urgency? These people have given notice of a demonstration for 2-3 months, and you waited until the eve of the day and then went to get a court order. Which court order is that? Can anybody in good conscience who read law after the first 2 weeks in the law faculty tell me that you can sue anybody and get a judgment? Who are you enforcing it against? I think we need to begin to talk concretely. I have been around since the days of military dictatorship. I would never have imagined that today we could be doing this kind of things. That's not the way to run a democracy.
So are you suggesting that, you know, the government should have just allowed the protest to go on everywhere, you know? Those
orders were not founded in the jurisprudence of law.
Yeah, and
who is the defendant?
I'm asking this.
How can you make it impossible for people to protest?
I'm asking beyond the...
Those orders cannot stand the test of judicial constitutionalism.
So, in essence, what you're saying is that...
If you interrogate them as a lawyer properly so-called, not just anybody who claims to be a lawyer. If you are a real lawyer, interrogate them. Those orders don't make sense.
So, in essence, you're saying that you know, people should have just been allowed to protest and all of that. Probably when the
government... Of course, the police should exercise their duties of making sure the protest is peaceful.
Peaceful. Nelson, what would be your reaction to this?
Well, my reaction to it is that from all intent and purposes, the protesters, organizers never signaled a notice of the protest. It was towards the 1st of August that we started hearing that the protest will commence on 1st of August. And those were rumors. And you recognize that even the Inspector General of Police, you know, summoned a meeting in which he invited them for dialogue to know the modalities of their protest so that the police will be able to give them protection and what have you. It was only their counsel, of which even one, when they held the protest on day one and they unleashed mayhem, and that one, the lawyer advised them, who claimed to be their counsel, they disowned him and called him all sorts of names. The issue about the court order, I want to believe that this studio or this program is not a competent court of higher jurisdiction than the court that gave the order. So if anybody has a problem with that court order, we all know where to go. You go to a higher court to vacate that order. But so long as the court has given an order, that order subsists. Then talking about, you know, restricting protesters to a venue, you recognize that even in the attempt to restrict them to the Moshood Abiola Stadium in Abuja, we saw what happened on the streets of Abuja, where the protesters started attacking motorists, you know, dispossessing them of their valuables. Maybe it was the court order that, you know, made them to violate the laws of the land. I want to be educated on that. The state has done what is needful with regards to maintaining law and order. And if organizers of an event have ulterior motives, if their motives are genuine, if they don't want to cash in on the economic situation of Nigerians, they should have come into the open. Why remain in hiding? We are products of protest, and when we want to go on protest, we state our demands and we put our faces and names forward. We don't keep into hiding. Till as we speak, we don't yet know the organizers of the protest, except for some Mogbomoya, like we say in Yoruba language. Those are the great crashers who are giving demands. And that is why I said earlier on that this protest had no defined demands that one could say, oh, this is what they were, you know, agitating for. It's a fact that that the country is going through hard times. and
Right.
which does not, which does not discriminate between the rich and the poor. But to hide under the right to protest, to commit treasonable felony, to unleash mayhem on the innocent Nigerians, it's unacceptable and must be condemned.
All right, Debo Adeniran is reconnected with us. Let me come to you, Mr. Adeniran. Do you think there could have been a better way? There could have been a better way for these protests to be conducted or organized, better than the way it was organized? Eze Onyekwere has just made mention of the situation in Kenya, where the Kenyan protesters trooped out on the street, and eventually the government listened to them, and their demands were the government started implementing their demands. Do you think in the case of Nigeria, this could have been better organized? And do you think it was also a mistake on the part of the protesters to have said, look, they do not have organizers and that there were no leaders at all?
Thank you very much. It is not right for any protest group not to have or to claim that they don't have leaders. Maybe their leaders have their reasons why they don't want to come out to claim the leadership or to give direction to the protest. Actually, even before the protest, my office have made a number of demands on the government that tallies with what the protesters were asking for. But for a protest to succeed, you need to have consulted among yourself, amongst those who are interested in protesting. You need to have mapped out your strategies to include the route. If you have to do street procession, you need to have determined what the convergence point will be. You need to have selected some of your cadres who will be named as protest marshal, who will be at the fringes to ensure that your protest is not hijacked. No external people actually infiltrate your ranks, and any members of your organization, the coalition organization that is doing the protest, that want to go outside the prescription of the general house when you are discussing, will be cautioned and will be restricted. Then the convergence point will be identifiable even by external people. That was what happened in 2012 when people refer to glibly. Several meetings held, that culminated in what you call Save Nigerian Group and National Intervention Group. Save Nigeria Group had the initial meeting at a Sheraton Hotel. Then we we hired a secretariat. The same thing with National Intervention Group, joined by Joint Action Front with the labor centers that had their own meeting at Yaba. They agreed on the protest day, and everybody moved from their own convergent point, meeting point, to point of the what do you call it now? The point of the rally, which was Ganifa Freedom Park in Nojota. Now, every item to be discussed have been pre-discussed at various meetings that were held by the three planks of those who organize it. We knew Pastor Tunde Bakare. We knew late Dr. Toji Braithwaite. We knew the leadership of JAF and the labor movement then that actually came out to say that they are leading this protest. We made prior representation to the government of the day that this is what Nigerians were asking for, and that the government should implement it. Otherwise, there will be nationwide protests. Then we knew those who represented us in other parts of the country, including Abuja. When you talk about Jaye Gaskia and the rest of them who are in Abuja, then they determine the safe convergent point, Baga, the bus stop in Abuja. Some chose Area 1 and some chose some other places. Then they converged and made the they made their point. Now, that would have been a better way to control a protest. And that was why it wasn't violent. Then, if the demands were made, were clearly articulated, and the government knew that these were meetable, whether they agree with it or not, that was what Nigerians wanted. Okay. Then the police also had a duty to do by conducting themselves in a way that would secure the protesters and guard against infiltration by the so-called hoodlums. For some of you don't believe that any Nigerian is a hoodlum. It's only those who make themselves uncontrollable that we will, treat as not being part of the protest. So basically, those were the basic errors that have been made by the present protesters. Their points were not clearly articulated. They made general issues, like I have highlighted the other time. They didn't make direct representation to government. Government has not rejected what they demanded for. And like I also earlier said, some of their demands, even when the frenzy was going on in town.
I'm afraid we haven't got time. But let me just give my other guests the opportunity to just say their final words. And I'll start with you, Eze Onyekwere. Just give me your final word on this, because we're actually out of time.
Should have been about the government responding to the legitimate interests and demands of the people, and not a lecture on how and what the people who we are protesting against bad governance did not do. I think the media needs to be more properly focused so that we can gain much out of the labors of some people who are actually very patriotic, and who some others think that they are treasonable felons without even any court pronouncing them so. So I think we should properly guide ourselves so that we can make progress in this country. Otherwise, we'll be running round and round without any movement.
All right, Nelson.
Well, my admonition is to Nigerians that Nigerians should be vigilant and not allow people with interest other than national security and peace to lure them and incite them into acts that are against national interest. Nigerians need to recognize that whatever we are going through, like we say, tough times don't last, but tough people do. Together we shall overcome. They should not succumb to threats, intimidation, and incitements from any quarter.
Mr. Adeniran, no doubt every protest must have it must have an end. And
it must have a face.
If a protest does not achieve its intended objective, then it makes no sense. So let me get your final word.
Protest. I mean, I am not giving a lecture on how protest should, but we need to enlighten ourselves. The first precondition for anything you want to do is general education. And when people are well educated, they know what they are going out for. Protest is not a guerrilla warfare. If we want to go for guerrilla warfare, we are not going to plan in the open, and we are not going to make that open to everybody. And it is a good thing that the administration went the judicial way. That is the civilized way to actually do anything. They went to court, the court made an order, and that order, whether it was carried out in the breach or not, that is a story for another day. So basically, what Nigerians need to know is that when they want to go out for protest, they should get themselves organized. They should have leadership that the government of the day, the duty bearers can relate with. Because if you say you are a headless mob, then that means that the government will treat you like a mob, and they will not be able to negotiate with you, because every disagreement ends up on negotiation table. If the government doesn't know who to call to the table, or who to approach, or who to actually hold responsible for what, then it will be led in a quagmire. So basically, we should guard against future occurrences so that we will not let our protests turn to violence, because we have not declared war. And if it is not a war, then we have to treat it so. Then we should also avoid going from the level of civility to committing treason. It is not the people that will pronounce
Gentlemen,
them.
I think we just have to end it there. I want to thank you very much for coming on the program. Debo Adeniro, thank you for your time. Nelson Ekujimi, thank you also for your time. And Ezo Nyekpore, I thank you so very much for coming on the show. And thanks very much for your contributions. They've been quite enlightening. Thank you so very much. We'll take a short break now, but we'll be right back to continue the program. Stay with us, don't go away.
Opinions are free, facts are sacred, but truth is universal.
How, in practical terms, can we, for instance, de-escalate the tension?
Because when you go into public office, you must be ready to answer to the people.
We know where the enemy is. 3 places. The Lake Chad Basin, the border area between Nigeria and Cameroon, and then the Sambisa Forest.
On DEJI360, we give you a complete dose of everything. Opinion, facts, and undiluted truth.
I hardly believe what politicians say in this part of the world.
A new Nigeria is possible, a future is possible.
We delve into the issues, dissect it so that you can understand it, and use it to take action.
I don't think there's any need for any governor to look for grant for ranching.
DEJI360, dissecting the issues.